Welcome back. We're here with Jim Saunders and Troy Kinsey, continuing our conversation on the major issues that either passed or failed in the legislative session. So let's go to one of the issues that was heavily pushed but didn't make it across the finish line, and that's the issue of guns. I mean, there were a lot of areas that these gun bills were attempting to proffer new carrying areas and new restrictions, or new allowances, if you will. Who wants to start on guns?
Well, the conventional wisdom is in Tallahassee, the NRA holds sway. They've had an iron grip on Republicans here. Republicans have marched in lockstep with them. That all changed this session because you have airport carry, campus carry, open carry, which all went down. Critically, interestingly, stand your ground passed in the final minutes of this session because the Senate ultimately took a House amendment. On the whole, though, it was not a good session for the gun lobby, and that doesn't portend well, I think, for the lobby in 2018. If they can't get it done in a non-election year, fresh off a Republican wave, it's going to be difficult to get these priorities passed going forward.
All right. Jim?
Well, I think it's they did get a win in the end on the stand your ground. It shifted a burden of proof in the stand your ground law that the NRA has been lobbying for a few years. So they did get a pretty big win there at the very end. But some of the really high-profile issues, as Troy alluded to, they never even got out of committees. The Senate has proved to be a cemetery for some of these gun issues over the last few years. I mean, and I think there's an interesting dynamic that's going on. Was that this year it was Senator Ana Terry Flores from Miami. The last 2 years it was Senator former Senator Miguel Diaz de la Portilla from Miami. Both Republicans have essentially blocked these bills. And I think there's sort of an interesting dynamic going on that, some of these gun issues aren't so popular down in South Florida and in Miami and some areas outside of the more rural areas of the state or northern Florida. So, I mean, that's kind of why they've died the past few years. So, but I think a lot of us thought that they might have a better chance this year because Greg Steube, who's a senator from Sarasota, was the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, where a lot of this has gotten bottled up, and he is very pro-Second Amendment, but he couldn't get them through his own committee.
Well, so that was really the capper, if you will, on the session of vices: marijuana, gambling, guns. I mean, that was it. But typically, the Florida legislature leads on the major, most core economic issues like workers' compensation insurance and a plethora of other insurances. Those are usually the oxygen stealers, all the weight and all the money. But this year, all the lobbying influence was on those other three issues. Let's get into workers' comp, because that did not pass, and that's going to affect every business and every plaintiff in Florida. Yeah,
it is really surprising to me that they could not, they never even really made it that far. I mean, it got to the House and Senate floors, but it wasn't really that high profile. In workers' comp, there was a 14.5% rate increase approved last year for businesses. It started taking effect in December. A lot of that resulted from Florida Supreme Court rulings. So there has been pressure for a year from the business community to do something about workers' comp. And it just kind of muddled along the whole session. In the end, they both had bills up on the floor, and but they could never reach agreement on it. The big issue was attorneys' fees. What limits should be placed on attorneys' fees for injured workers? But, you just never got the sense that there was that much commitment from the top to get this done. And honestly, Governor Scott was sort of MIA on that issue. There's also a lot of discussion in the legislature and in the lobbying corps that Speaker Corcoran and Senate President Negron are fairly aligned with the trial bar. The trial bar did not want a workers' comp bill to pass with limits on attorneys' fees. So in the end, it didn't pass. I think everybody's expecting there's going to be more increases in workers' comp rates. And in fact, I had a business lobbyist tell me that he would rather have no bill passed than a bad bill, because that will lead to rate increases over the next year that will ratchet up pressure on the legislature to do something next year.
Troy, what sort of flavoring did you see from your perspective on this issue?
I saw producers, TV producers, when you tell them workers' comp, their eyes glaze over. It's just not a sexy issue. Right. It doesn't resonate with people back home. Yeah, it's a hot button issue here for the business community, but outside of the Tallahassee bubble, people don't even know what the issue is. People don't know there was a critical court ruling here. Right. And I think also there's very low political risk, because because people back home aren't going to hold politicians in Tallahassee accountable for not acting on an issue they don't know about. It'll come back, I'm sure, next year, but I didn't do a single story on workers' comp, and that really is telling, I think.
Yeah. Well, I love workers' comp, so
right.
But
it's tough to tell. Right.
But I do think, just again, big picture, I think you have to look at this session as a big success for the trial bar. I mean, they prevented a workers' comp bill from passing that they didn't want to pass. There's also an insurance issue known as assignment of benefits, which relates to property insurance, that they fought hard against, and they killed that bill. I mean, that one was never made it very far. Right. So they had a good session, which I think is something, I've been here almost 20 years, and it is very unusual. I mean, the legislature over the past 20 years has been very pro-business, very anti-trial bar, and the trial bar has to go away from this session feeling pretty good.
So across Florida, Troy, from your perspective as a broadcast journalist, I mean, how much did all of these insurance issues translate into the 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock broadcast, or was it the Vice issues that carried the day?
Oh, come on, Brad. Vice carries the day on TV. I don't think I did a single insurance story all session long, right. which really is telling, because if I do an insurance story, it's gonna be because people are complaining about their rates going up.
Right.
That hasn't happened for businesses or for individuals yet. And again, that might change over
press
the coming
conferences
year.
and governors and associations and coalitions. I mean, that's really when that stuff heats up and it becomes soundbiteable, if you will.
Right. Well, when we have busloads of people rallying on the Capitol steps because they're sick of their rates going up, that's when you know it's become a prescient issue.
Well, Charlie Crist used it very well on property insurance. I mean, the insurance industry hated him, but I mean, he used it very well. Property insurance rates. That was a big political issue. Jeb Bush also used it back in the day on medical malpractice. I mean, those were big, high-profile, major issues, and I just didn't get the sense this year that the leadership was that tuned in to getting something done on these issues.
So let's take it out from these obscure issues or the ultra vicey issues that people want to do, and let's talk about education. I mean, this is one that banks the future of Florida. Talent is the currency, if you will, of future job growth and economy. What happened in the education space? Because it was playing around from everything from K-12 or from the college system to K-12. So let's walk through a little bit of that, because you had private sector, public sector. I mean, there was a lot of battles going on in that space.
Well, and I don't know if we really know what's happened with education, because we had, I believe, a 600-page proviso slipped into the budget in the final hours of the session, 72 hours before the budget was passed. Right. And so I think there's a lot of policy that leadership agreed on that we don't really know the specifics on.
Got to pass it.
But we do know that higher ed got a lot more money, and that was a big win for the Senate.
Yeah.
Well, I think we also know that Speaker Corcoran got some of his priorities in the K-12 space.
Right.
One of his priorities was a concept he called Schools of Hope, which was essentially to encourage charter schools to set up near failing traditional public schools. He wanted $200 million for that program, which was a huge amount of money. Now, I don't think he got all that money in the end, but he did get the program. So this is a big win for charter school supporters and for Speaker Corcoran. Another issue that the House has supported for years, in the past few years, is a teacher bonus program called the Best and Brightest. It's been very controversial because a lot of teachers don't think it's fairly applied. But again, he was able to get an expansion of that through. So I think, in that sort of K-12 realm, he was able to get a couple of his really hot button top priorities through. There's a lot of unhappiness, though, among school districts, because in the budget itself, there's not a lot of new money, barely any new money, for the K-12, regular, traditional K-12 system. There's not much new money. So a lot of them have kind of woke up in the final days of the session. We're going like, we're not getting what we wanted. So, I think it's going to be a fairly controversial issue going forward. But I do think that Speaker Corcoran can go home with some of his education priorities, packed away in his briefcase.
And funding for education isn't likely to improve. I mean, we've got these revenue projections showing some pretty big deficits on the horizon.
Right.
So I think this was the last opportunity that education advocates had to get a lot more money in the Florida budget.
Well, one thing that might cut against that, though, is next year's an election year, and they love to spend money on education.
So great segue. Let's shift to that. So what does this session mean for the 2018 election?
Yeah.
Let's jump in. We've had a few candidates declare. We're getting ready to move into what is really the beginning of the real political season. Your average Floridian will start seeing mail-in commercials roughly around December and January of next year. But we in the process see it happening right now. So what do you guys see, Troy?
I think you have a big winner in Rick Scott and a big loser in Rick Scott and a big winner in Richard Corcoran.
Right.
Because again,
They'll
going
probably
into the
just
session,
sample that one accidental quote that you just gave versus the other
they
one.
might,
Right.
but it's not on me,
Right,
right? It's
right.
on the ad makers.
Okay.
So the big winner has been Richard Corcoran because he came into the session with next to no name ID, as most Florida House speakers do, asking for a lot. He asked for the charter school funding, for example. He asked for the big cuts, and we haven't talked about this, in Enterprise Florida and Visit Florida.
Right.
He didn't eliminate Enterprise Florida, but he zeroed out the business incentive budget. Those were both priorities for Governor Scott.
Right.
Governor Scott asked for $600 million worth of tax cuts. He got an iota of that, not even 10% of what he asked for, and he had that big loss on incentives and tourism promotion.
And really, that cut was a win for Americans for Prosperity. I mean, that was what Richard Corcoran's allies, if you will, in the grassroots area.
Strange bedfellows, right? Because Governor Scott ran for office in 2010 as a Tea Party darling. He was a darling of AFP, and he's come full circle and has become arguably the consummate politician. And so I think going into 2018, he doesn't have a whole lot to tout in terms of accomplishments from the 2017 session. And I think that it's conceivable, maybe not likely, but conceivable that you have Governor Scott running for the Senate and potentially facing a GOP primary involving Richard Corcoran. I know the talk about the Speaker has been that he's going to run for governor or is thinking about running for governor. He could very easily run for the U.S. Senate and challenge Rick Scott in a primary, and I think do pretty well.
Well, Jim, I'm going to give you the final word for.
Well, I mean, we're already seeing the candidates emerge outside of the issues that Troy was talking about. Adam Putnam has already started his gubernatorial campaign. Gwen Graham, Andrew Gillum. I mean, Chris King down in Orlando. I mean, we are already.
That's the joke around Tallahassee. Right?
Well, he's put $1 million into his campaign, so he's not Chris who. Totally. Yeah. But I mean, we are seeing the gubernatorial campaign already start to shape up. And I think that's what's going to be the story over the next year and a half is who's our next governor. And the U.S. Senate race is going to be big. There's no doubt about that. But we're also seeing sort of the other cabinet races starting to shape up too. We've got Matt Caldwell, who's a state rep, and Denise Grimsley, who are running for Agriculture Commissioner, Jay Fantz running for Attorney General. I mean, so legislators and are starting to make their moves. So I think people are just waiting for the session to get over, and then political season starts.
Ready to hit the road, Troy?
No, we don't hit the road.
No.
We live in Tallahassee.
No,
We're here all the time. But, we have to hold government accountable, so we
Right.
can't hit the road.
Right.
We
I
have
love
to
it.
be here.
All right.